y'all. Welcome back to another episode of Chats from the Blog Cabin. You know, the show where I virtually invite people into the blog cabin to chat about life, our books, our culture, or anything. And today we're chatting with Nicole Black. She wrote the book, I Can Still Hear You. And Nicole, I want to say, I've said this a lot lately, but this one particularly, everything in this book, I can say, honestly, I could see myself going through this as well in my life. So I want to thank you for first writing your book. And we'll talk about your book in a minute, but let's talk about who you are first. You already told me before we went on that you're an elementary school teacher too, as well. So,
well, actually, that's kind of new. So that was a thank you, COVID. We have to kind of reassess, like, who am I? What am I doing? Because what I was really like super focused on was speaking and writing. And unfortunately, COVID said nobody's going to be doing speaking events for a moment now. So, and I'm not a huge lover of like Zoom speaking engagements. I just don't find it as authentic as, sitting or being in a room live with people. So I had to kind of backpedal and go, what was it that I wanted to do before I had the job? So I'd owned bakeries before I was speaking. And I was like, what did I want to do before I did that? And I was like, oh yeah, I want to be a teacher. And so I looked at it and I was like, well, the easiest way for me to do it is to get my master's in elementary education. So a little over a year ago, I started that program and I graduated in a year. And that's with 13 weeks of student teaching and 5 weeks of clinical supervision where I just watch other teachers teach. So I got a lot done in the last year. So now I'm almost officially a teacher, but that really was, and it's also something that I love a lot. I love working with children. It's much easier to work with children than like trying to talk adults through all of their past trauma. It's easier to like start with a child, make sure they don't have that trauma, or if they do, that they know how to deal with it right then and there. And then, right, they grow up to be adults. They're not quite as affected as some of us have been. So that's a little bit about me. And let's see, I live in Southern California with my daughter. I've had other careers in this lifetime where I owned a bakery bistro. I also worked in human resources for a major movie company, and that's about it. So,
and you had a little visitor coming across your back.
My pretty boy, he is 15 and a half years old, and he found out that he's a very skittish cat. So if you came to my house, if you were here with me, you would not see him. He loves Zoom. And so every time, like, I'm on Zoom, and there was a moment where, like, in the beginning, people would be like, oh, you're going to move the cat. And it was actually more traumatizing to move the cat than to just let him show up and show his face. So
and I'm a big animal lover. So there we go.
Me too.
So let's talk about I Can Still Hear You. I honestly say that parts of that book, my backstory is my dad passed away in 2015, at the very beginning of 2015. And there are still moments of time when I can still hear him saying things to me. So when you were talking, some of the things that you were saying, I'm like, oh man. And the biggest thing, anybody that knows me, and I meant to grab it because it's sitting right over there, is I always have cardinals around me now. That's my Christmas tree has a cardinal on it for him and everything. And that's one of the big things in your book that you write about is cardinals. So that's why when I sent you the talking points, I'm like, the cardinal, we have to talk about the cardinal. So let's talk about the cardinal.
We have to talk about the cardinal. So the cardinal also showed up for me. When my dad first passed away, not just moments before your dad did. My dad left in July of 2014. And I was sitting in my living room, distraught. I'd already lost my mom, so I'm not a stranger to losing a parent, but that was a surprise. And my dad's was not a surprise. And so now I've done it both ways. And I can tell you that they're equally painful. Neither one, knowing or not knowing, doesn't make it any easier. And it doesn't make you miss the person any less. And so I was sitting there, and after my mom had passed away, because I was 28 when she died, I said, if there's a God, show me a sign. And a white butterfly appeared out of nowhere. And I thought, okay, all right, thank you, Mom. But then every time when I would be like in times of trouble, or when you need your mom, right?
Mhm.
I would see a white butterfly, sometimes out of nowhere. So when my dad passed away, I was just sitting in the living room crying, and I looked out the back window and I saw the biggest monarch. I mean, this monarch, it was this big. It was like both of my hands wide. It
Mhm.
looked like a fake butterfly, but it was real. And so monarchs show up a lot for me.
Mhm.
But then cardinals started showing up, and it wasn't just the bird. So there is a baseball team called the
Mhm.
Cardinals, right? And so like little things would start showing up from them, and I'm like, like I love baseball, but I don't follow it or anything. But all these little tiny things would start showing up. And sometimes it would just be something that was like cardinal red, that beautiful cardinal red color. And I'd
Mhm.
look and I'd be like, oh, that's what that color is called. Okay, cardinal red. Of course it is. They were everywhere. And then in Hawaii, where the story is set, that is when all that stuff really did happen, with the birds like coming down out of nowhere, and like pennies and dimes and stuff showing up literally out of nowhere, like could walk and then seconds later turn around and then it's there. I can't make this stuff up. So my whole thought, and especially like about the cardinals, is that the veil, if you will, is very thin in between this dimension and the dimension where I believe our deceased loved ones go to. And I think that like a lot of times when like the cardinals would show up for me, it would always be in a moment where I'd be like, gosh, I wish somebody was here to see it.
Mhm.
So last year when I was in Hawaii with my daughter, and I was telling her I was doing this hike that's in the book with her, and I was telling her about the red cardinal, and all of a sudden she goes, "You mean like that one right there?" And she points ahead on the path. And on that path, I had never seen a red cardinal. And I
Mhm.
was like, that's him. Yes, that's the one. So they are literally everywhere. I can't get rid of them.
Mhm.
And so sometimes like I'll have friends who are like, well, maybe you should try to manifest it as something different. And I'm like, okay, how about a peacock then? If what about a peacock? And one of my students was coughing, and I looked up, and there were giant peacock feathers in the science lab where I was with the students. And I just started shaking my head, and cannot write this stuff. You can't write this stuff. So I was like, okay. But if you still didn't believe, my daughter and I watched Frozen over the weekend, and all of a sudden, just one line in the movie, all of a sudden it's like a peacock. And I'm like, okay, I get it. You're here. I don't know what the sign is. I don't know what it means, but I know that you're here. And that's all I guess I really need to know. So,
I love that. But there's also different signs that you write in your book as well, like the same number, the patterns, the importance of patterns, the same numbers repeating over and over and over again, and things like that. So let's talk about those.
that's oh, I love repeating patterns. I am somebody who thinks like, people will show you who they are more than they'll tell you, right? But if you actually just sit back and watch, kind of like a movie, you can actually see people's patterns in the way they walk and the way they talk and the way that they treat other people. And it's really, really interesting. So the numbers thing still happens to me to this day, where 555 happens a lot,
Mhm.
and that's a sign of major change coming. 222's always been a really huge one for me. And then the repeating fours have now started, and repeating threes. So I always kind of look like, well, what does it mean? And every single one says your angels are close to you. So I kind of just look at it now and think, wow, that's really cool. Huh. Somebody's trying to get me a message. And even if I don't know what the message is, I'll just stop, take a collective breath, and just think, thank you for whatever it is. If they're stopping something so that
Mhm.
I don't, have a conversation that I don't want to have, because sometimes that happens. We have conversations we don't want to have. And maybe me stopping and looking at the clock slows it down enough where that other thing doesn't happen. So that's the other thing that I didn't really intimate as much in my book, but I do honestly think that those things do happen. So, and I wanted to, I just didn't do a good enough job.
I love that.
Hey, it's
Now,
also a fiction book, you know, it's a work, I'm
yeah,
a work in progress.
that is so true. But it's fiction based on real life, correct? Like you
Yeah.
kind of built some of their story around your dad.
The whole, so in the story, there is a lighthouse in Maui, but it's very small. You wouldn't be able to climb up in it the way that I describe it in the story. And my dad was in the Coast Guard. So some of this stuff is true, but my dad was a Hollywood movie director. So a lot of my life, I think I kind of grew up living my life like it was a movie. You know, and then like waiting for that Hollywood ending. And in real life, you know, like when you're having a real conversation with somebody, you can't make those endings just happen. You know, it has to like happen. Everything happens naturally the way it's supposed to. Even when we kind of like step in and kind of change things up, like, no, I want this to happen, you know, it won't matter. You know, we get where we're supposed to get when we're supposed to get there. I definitely talk about that in the book because she's walking on a path, much like I'm walking a path and we're all walking paths, right? And that's why, you know, you see the little memes like, be kind, you have no idea what that person is going through. Literally, like their whole world could have just fallen apart moments earlier. You don't know, you know? And so it's always for me, I kind of think of it as like how our footprints are in the sand, right? Like, and if we can just walk a little bit more gently, not everybody knows what a footprint in the sand is because not everybody has walked on sand. So I apologize for that metaphor, but, you know, just walking where we're cognizant that like, you know, I weigh 125 pounds. I'm not boom, 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 throwing all of my 125 pounds into the earth with every step I take, right? Like I can just glide over it a lot easier. And I think it also, that helps to make people more approachable, you know, when we're not just all like focused in me, and which is easy to do. And also, you know, just taking the time to recognize that everybody is fighting a battle that you know nothing about. So
that is so true. And now you have your book with you, and I know I asked you to read part of it, but we have to do a brief commercial break, and then we'll be right back, and I'll help you read part of your book.
Thank you.
Branding yourself begins with self-reflection. Taking stock of your strengths. Is there a particular talent that helps you shine? In this series, founder of Pierre Branding Group, Lydia Pierre, sits down with the executives and entrepreneurs to shed light on why it is important to brand yourself and get ahead.
And we are back chatting with Nicole Black, who wrote I Can Still Hear You, and she's going to read part of her book, and I cannot wait to hear what passage you picked out.
So you're going to help me, as a matter of fact. Oh. I'm going to have you pick a number between 5 and 50.
Okay, let's do 25.
25. So I'm turning to page 25. I went through this morning and I was like, what am I going to read? And then I was like, well, I don't know, whatever's supposed to show up. Ooh. So 25 actually happens to be the start of chapter 3. Okay. Mark has always had an obsession with tacos. The last time I saw him 5 years ago when his father was just about to move to Florida, he'd come in from New York with the worst hankering ever for real Mexican food, the kind you could only find in Southern California. So before he'd been able to help his father clean up the house and get it ready for sale, we'd gone to the local dive restaurant on the corner to satisfy that craving. He'd eaten 6 tacos that day, and that wasn't even his record. When he was 15, he could probably double that. I'm a growing boy, he'd say, and it probably wasn't the tacos so much as his good genes. But now he was nearly 6'5", lean and fit. He motioned the waiter from our booth as he polished off his third. "Just keep 'em coming," he said, fist in his Dos Equis. "I'll tell you when to stop." I peered over my second shrimp taco. "You think they don't feed you over there?" He shrugged. "They got good pizza, Thai food, Indian, sure, but nothing beats a good taco." He gazed lovingly at it before shoving half of the thing into his mouth at once like a rabid animal. I rolled my eyes. "You're still as gross as ever, I see." "Ah, but you love me." I think that's what he said, but his mouth was full. So, interestingly enough, that is a passage about Scarlett's best friend, Mark, coming back from New York to be with her during the funeral. And Mark is a pivotal character in the book. And so I have been asked, Mark is not real. He is not somebody from my past, because there's moments where like Mark clearly cares about Scarlett. And so I think a lot of people have rooted for me that Mark is real. He's not. But who knows? Maybe he will be one day.
Maybe you manifested Mark in your book that he'll come into real life, be there. You never know.
You never know. So, but he is somebody who helps her on the journey, but also lets her know, like, he's always pushing her, like, you have to do it yourself. Because like everything in life, like we can have our best friends and our parents pushing us, right? But if you don't want to do it, you're not going to do it.
Do it. That is so true. So let's talk about your book. It's the premise of a young woman who basically is really down on her luck, like she's lost her job, she's at the point of getting evicted. I noticed there was a cat in this story. Was that your cat? Was it based on your cat as well?
That is based on my cat, but Tank in the book is an orange tabby cat, and my cat's a gray Russian blue cat. I didn't want him to get, upset if he didn't give him a big enough role in the book.
and she loses her dad, which wasn't unexpectedly. Like she basically knew her dad was dying. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But her dad sets her on a treasure hunt after he's died, about finding things and having to go on a journey. And the journey is more, it's not about finding treasure. It's more about finding who she is.
Correct.
So was that a journey kind of similar to what you went on?
It is 100% the journey that I went on. And I don't know if you can relate, because losing a father, I will tell you, first of all, not everybody is close to their parents. And not everybody should be. There are people whose parents, they probably shouldn't have been parents. I am going to tell you, I am going to preface everything that I say with that. I got so lucky in the parent department. And I got really, really lucky in the father-daughter department that I had a dad that I was incredibly close to, which made his passing even harder. And, I had moved to Santa Barbara so that my daughter, who was 2 when we moved here, she's 16 now, so that she could know my dad better, because that was incredibly important to me that she know her grandfather. And I have never regretted that decision. I have always thought that was one of the best things that I ever did, was so that she could know her. But my dad was definitely somebody who would never do the thing, like if I told him something that was like painful or like, Dad, I made a giant mistake, and we're in the car, he would say, "Thank you, Nicole. We can talk when we get to the rest stop." Like it was always very even and calm. Like there was nothing was ever a big deal, but he was always like, well, what's the message behind that? Because there's always like, you can always read between the lines. There's always hidden messages, right? And people will tease me like, I think things are hidden in plain sight, when I was getting on with you and I was like, where's my book? It was right next to me, right on top of my desk, hidden in plain sight. So that's the first place we don't look, right? Because we just assume it's not going to be there. And so when I was writing this book actually took about 6 years to write. I started when, right after pretty much right after he had passed away. And I have a brother, and originally the brother was in the book, but then it felt like, no, she doesn't need a crutch. The brother should be, it should be this boyfriend guy instead, or best friend growing up guy. Don't want to give that away, but I just kind of did. And so all of those things were, yes, I did go to Hawaii. I had to take a break from what life is as I know it, so that I could get clear and try to connect in with my dad so that he could lead me. And there were a lot of moments when I was writing this book, and you've read it, you know, there's no swear words in it. Not one. But I used to have a terrible potty mouth. And there was a lot of moments that I thought, is he writing this through me? Because, you know, like I would, even when I would be typing, would be like, and then bad word. But when I was writing, like purposefully, no bad words ever came out. It was very
wow.
Yeah.
Well, I will say that you have a lot of life nuggets in here as well. I mean, I took notes while I was reading, and I came out with 3 pages front and back of notes.
Oh my gosh.
Of things that I was like, man, some great advice in there. And you don't even think when you're reading a fiction book that you're going to get as much advice as what you give. But it's not like throw it in your face, you need to do this. It's more like, oh, wait a second. Maybe I need to do this. You know, you're reading it and you're going, that really resonates with me. Was your intent
so much
when you
for saying that, Melissa? Because there was a moment where a reviewer had said, like, she's just giving life lessons. And I thought, well, and what's wrong with that? Like, you know, we all need to hear things. Everybody says the same thing. It's just, when is your mind ready to receive that information, and who is the person, who's the vessel that is delivering the information? So I didn't feel like the life lessons were, like, you know, hammered out like this one person had said. So I'm glad that you said that, and that makes me feel a lot better about it, because that is what it was meant to be. It was just like nuggets sprinkled, right? It's glitter. It's sprinkled along the path. And so you see it here and there, but it's not like, I'm in your face. This is what this book is supposed to be doing. I had really wanted to do something like the Celestine Prophecy. But unfortunately, I'm just not that good of a writer. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with admitting that that is not my strong point.
I love that. I mean, but honestly, I wonder if it's because maybe the reviewer had never lost a parent, because I think if you, coming from the mindset that you lost a parent and you really wish that you could hear them speaking to you again, that maybe that's why it resonated so much with me, because I could hear my dad's voice in this as well. And you were talking about cardinals and your everything else, and watching your parent, I'm not about to tear up, and watching your parent suffer from an illness, and someone who's larger than life, because I can already tell in the book that your dad was larger than life, because even though we don't really get to meet the dad in the book, the only thing we see is the very beginning when he is dying. Yeah. But just the interactions that she has with people afterwards when they talk about her dad. And that to me was like, your whole book is based on your memories of your dad, and you kind of drew it in so that everybody else who's lost a parent can say, you know, I can resonate. I understand where she's coming from, because that's my dad as well, or that's my mom, or that's maybe my sister, or something like that as well.
Yeah. That's funny that you said that. I was originally going to call it I Can Still Hear You, Dad. But I thought, well, what if people didn't like their dad, or what if they lost their mom instead? But I probably should have had it as I Can Still Hear You, Dad, because like you had a very strong connection with your father too. And it sounds like he still visits and, you know, bestows advice upon you. And I wish that more people would be open to thinking that, you know, or even if they don't believe, like, you know, let other people have their beliefs, you know, like whatever brings you comfort in times of grief, as long as it's not illegal or immoral or hurting somebody else, you have to do what feels right, like in the moment.
That is so true. And I had actually copied down the poem that you included in the book. Why did you include the If by Rudyard Kipling?
That poem is a beautiful poem. And I wish that I could tell you that my dad had read it to me as a child and that's why it had such special, special meaning. But that's not the truth. So when I was writing the book, there was a moment where I was like, well, Dad, I need a really great poem. And I don't want it to be Invictus because that was his and my poem. And I just wanted it to be something different. And, kind of like how magic just shows up, right? I think I opened up Facebook and somebody had posted that poem. And I thought, well,
Wow.
that poem fits the bill 100%. And so that's how that poem was chosen.
Wow. I absolutely love that poem.
Me too.
Now, let's go back to the talking about the loss of your dad, because in the back of the book, you actually do like it's the acknowledgement. And you start talking about how you started writing it because, where is it at? There was the letter from your dad sealed in an envelope, and you actually read it that day during the fire in California, I think.
I did on the interview with Jack Canfield. I just moved and I was thinking that they were right behind me, but I'd have to move some stuff around to show you the letters. So that was actually, my dad had written right after my mom died. My dad sat at his typewriter. This was in the 90s. And or like I think it was 2000, so we still had typewriters back then, and he was like writing this big letter and I was like, whoa, what's that thing? It was like 15 pages long, right?
Wow.
Single spaced. And he's like, oh, it's a letter for you for when I die. And I was like, well, can I read it now? And he said, absolutely not, it's for when I die. And I was like, well, so you can imagine, like, I remembered that letter. And then like he had sealed it with like packing tape. Like there was no getting into that letter. He would have known, and he would have been really disappointed if I had done it. So after he passed away, the first thing I wanted was like, I felt like something in the letter might give me comfort.
Mm-hmm.
And I read it and I was like, wow, okay, he talks about an ex-boyfriend of mine who, and I thought, wow, I've waited all this time and it's about this guy that my whole family couldn't stand. Oh no. Okay, I won't make that mistake again, I promise. And I'm reading the letter and my brother's like, he has the same letter and he goes, nope, doesn't mean anything to me. It doesn't make any sense. And I was like, okay, whatever. So I put it away. And then when I was cleaning something out, I went to like find a box and that letter was in it. And I was like, wait a second. And this is years later. This is the Thomas fire, which was the biggest fire that our state had seen, started in 2017, is raging all around. And I'm looking for buttons for a coat and I'm digging through this old box of buttons. And I find this letter from my dad, sealed, same exact letter. But I think to myself, no, I know I opened that. Like 100%, I know I opened that letter. So I go and I very carefully open this one and I take it out and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it's going to be new. No, it's the same exact letter, which was fine, but I had new eyes to read it through.
Mm-hmm.
And then I thought, well, where's the other one? So I went and it was right where I had left it. So I'm like, okay, I have two. And then something happened last summer, which was after that video recording. So I was cleaning out my garage and I find the letter again. And I'm like, are you kidding me? But this one was my brother's and it was the one that he had opened. And I'm like, hey, you left this in my garage. And he lives in Los Angeles. He lives an hour and a half away from me. So there is no reason why his letter should be in my garage. But I opened it and I read it a third time with new eyes and got more, information and thought, okay, I know what's going on now. So it's been very interesting how he just keeps dropping this same letter. And I, like there's like a stamp on it, like a peregrine falcon. And I'm like, okay, is it a falcon? What am I supposed to be, finding? And then I'm like, maybe I'm just supposed to sit still and not look for anything right now. Maybe he just wants me to sit and read,
Well, the fact that he wrote the same letter that you found it 3 times and it's the same exact letter. Now what?
My brother doesn't have 2 copies, only me. And the outside of the envelope was handwritten, for Nicole Black, not to be read until my death or mental incapacitation. And it was written the same on all, well, my brother said his name. And then, but the same thing, sealed with different stamps, like from the Natural History Museum in New York. So part of me was like, oh, he's telling me that Scarlett lives on and she needs to have a part 2 where, where maybe mom comes in and perhaps she's supposed to go to New York. So that's where my mind goes. And I've been really busy working on that master's degree. So I haven't had time to like sit and write, like meditate and let things come through. But thank you, Melissa. I think that you just told me, not unknowingly, right?
Uh-huh.
You just let me know why things keep popping up again. Like, what's the purpose?
Because honestly, I could see a part 2 to this story.
Yeah. Because yes, like it ends like at a natural ending, right? It's, the story arc. All stories are exactly the same. They have to be. That's what makes stories work. But there's been such a big part of me that's like, gosh, I feel like it's not over, and New York would be really awesome. And then I'm like, okay, do I have it in me? I think I do.
You do. You have it in you. You totally have it in you. Now let's talk about the what the dad dies of in
right, because you were talking about the back of my book. And so normally what authors will put in the back of their book is like, follow me here, or buy my this, or find me now. And that is absolutely what you are supposed to do. As an author, you are supposed to put those things in there. This book was my labor of love to my father. That's why it's dedicated to my dad. And so I think for me, I didn't want to make it about like, hey, follow me, or, find me on Instagram, which you absolutely can. I'm writer Nicole B on Instagram. But my dad, and the reason why I'd wanted to move to California so that my daughter could know him, was my dad contracted a disease called idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. Idiopathic means they don't know the cause. There's a lot of theories, and, oddly enough, he was in New York renovating a brownstone, and that's where we think that he had enough asbestos exposure that might have been what the cause was. But again, idiopathic, we don't know. So perhaps she does need to go to New York to get some answers. She being Scarlett. Or me.
Yeah.
And so my dad, when he got diagnosed with that, I was actually pregnant with my daughter living in Florida, and he didn't tell me. And he had been at my wedding and he looked great. And then I saw him like right before my daughter was born. And I just, the look on my face, I'm like, what happened? He had literally aged 20 years in about a year and a half. And he was on something called interferon. They were trying like all kinds of experimental medications. None of it worked. And they put him on a lung transplant list. But he was older at the time when he got onto the list. And so, it's one of those things where they want to give as terrible as this sounds, when they're doing organ donations, what they want to do is they want to give it to the person who is going to benefit the longest from the donation. I think that's a polite enough way to say it where nobody feels like I'm an organ donor. I think everybody should be, like if I'm not going to be using it anymore, somebody else absolutely ought to be. And so we get the news that he has idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. He's on the lung transplant list. And I looked at my now ex-husband and I was like, I have have to go to California. I'm so sorry. We'll have to build our own bakery for you. And that will be that. And that's exactly what happened. And my daughter did get to know him. Now, when my dad had the lung transplant, it's funny because we got the call at the end of January in 2009. And as soon as he went in, it was, kind of a panicky thing because it's a 12-hour long surgery. And, you don't know if the lung is going to take. And if it doesn't take, you're probably not going to make it for very long. So, but the lung took, and they told us, so I'm telling you this because the doctors told us right when the lung took, they said 2 to 5 years is the survival rate post-transplant. Now you hear stuff like that when your loved one has a transplant and you think, yeah, 2 to 5 years. But this is my dad. He'll live forever. So, and my dad wasn't like a super athletic person or anything. He wasn't like, hitting the gym or like, riding his bicycle everywhere. So when he made it 5.5 years post-transplant, I felt like that was a really big thing. And UCLA is on the West Coast, I think the best place for any kind of transplantation. I think that UCLA is the best hospital on the West Coast, period. That's where he had his transplant. I'm sort of an honorary nurse there because when you start living in the room, you become a nurse. And so for my ask in my book, it is for people who feel so inclined to donate to UCLA for research. And also, for people to consider organ donation. Like it's just a little check mark, when you go to renew your driver's license. So that is kind of a little bit about how that story went in the back. And thank you for putting it up on your screen. So that is that organization, lungtransplantfoundation.org, is a woman whose father also passed away, I think, from idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. And so she kind of has this organization, and she really, that's her focus, is raising money. I'm so grateful for her because it's not something that I would be interested in making my prime focus. So I'm so happy that there's somebody out there that does want to make it their prime focus.
I so get this. And it's so funny that, we already talked about how this book touched me because of losing Dad. So I can definitely go with you on that. But my sister died of lung cancer. So, and she was 27 years old when she died. So, and I was pregnant with my very first baby, and that's 26 years ago. And there's still days where, I can still hear her as well. And I think I heard her through your book too, as well.
Wow, Melissa, that, first of all, I'm so sorry for your loss. 27 is, it's like you just barely got off the starting line, it's unfair in my opinion. And when people tell me like, well, God or whatever one believes in always takes the good ones first, I always think, yes, that's 100% true. So especially when, somebody goes early. And lung cancer, so lungs, just to bring it back for you. So like what happens in the lungs, like different parts of the body and different forms of medicine, Chinese medicine, the lungs represent grief and loss. And so it makes sense, when people are like, I'm really sad. And then they start smoking again. I'm like, well, that makes sense. Is that bringing you comfort? Then do that because you'll be able to quit smoking again. Everybody can. It's really easy. It's hard to stay quit. So. It's easy to quit. Hard to stay quit. So, but I think that the lungs, like, and it's the number one thing we need to sustain life, right? Breath. And for me, like, that's something that's incredibly important. Like, I hope that when I leave this planet, probably when I'm 100 or so, because it only takes the good ones first. I hope that the mark that I leave will be as big as the one that my dad left for me. Not just for my daughter, but my dad left a mark, on the world. And I so very much miss him. And I know that you can relate because, you've lost people. Something I'd love to talk to you about is, so there are a lot of times where people haven't lost people. And so I think that they think like, oh, I don't need this book. And I would argue that you absolutely do need it because you have an opportunity to see one person's point of view of what you might experience, and it's different for everybody, right? Like when, I found out yesterday that one of my very dear friends, who's only about 5 years older than me, has ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and frontal temporal dementia. And we had this lovely conversation and I was feeling great. And then she says, oh, by the way, the frontal temporal thing has erased all of my long-term memory. Where do I know you from? And I thought to myself, so I was like, oh, well, here, go on Facebook and then you can see our pictures together, and it was fine. But honestly, like, if you've never lost anybody, I'm really happy to hear that because, it is a pain unlike any other that you'll ever experience. And I'm hopeful that maybe this will help some people understand, like, like how sometimes they'll say, like, some people will look at you and go, God, well, it's been a year. Get over it already. Well, it's not that easy. You might hear a song or you'll see a cardinal or you'll just hear a running waterfall and you'll remember like this time when your dad took you to the waterfall up in Oregon and you guys jumped and it was really cool. And, you wished you still had that energy to like want to jump off of waterfalls, right?
Yep.
So little things. I just hope that people, loss or no loss, compassion's a huge thing for me. Like, having compassion and teaching about compassion for other people. So sorry, I got a little off track there.
No, you're perfectly fine. Because honestly, I like the part where you said it hits people differently. Grief does, and if you've not experienced grief, then that's major. Because to live as long as most of us have lived and not experienced, that's huge. But it hits everybody differently. There'll be some days where you're perfectly fine. Like my sister's been gone 26 years, but every year around her birthday, some days I'm good. Some days all I want to do is just ball up and watch TV or go visit her grave or do something for her. And this year it hit her birthday, the Marine Corps birthday, because my dad was a Marine, and Veterans Day all hit in the same week. And I was like, yeah, I'm useless this week.
So that was just very recently. That was 2 weeks. Yeah, 2 weeks ago. Was a hard week for you. And, I'll tell you, like my book came out in February. And when I was lucky enough that you said that you would have me on your show, I thought, oh, wow, well, it'll be November before I'm on her show. And then I thought, well, obviously there's a reason. And the date is 1122, right? So,
oh yeah, I didn't think of the date. But definitely, I think if it wasn't in the season where it's been 2 weeks past, because like I started reading it. I've had it for a while, but right. I just started, but you're meant to read it when you're meant to read it. And so I have my books where I have a lot of books coming in now where I just put the date on them and just go, okay, when we get a time, that's all I can do. And I was like, oh, I need to read her book. And I was like, oh, I need to read her book. And then I started reading and I'm like, why did I not read this earlier? But then I realized it's because I was coming off that week of grief and I needed to read that book at this book at the particular time because I can hear them. I can hear them talking to me.
Yeah. And especially like now we're heading into the holiday season, right? That can be, who do you want to be with? Well, you want to be with your dad and your sister, right? I would love to have my parents here. Finding new ways to find new traditions or creating new traditions for yourself. And then sticking with it and honoring it, like even if you're like, oh, I don't love always traveling by myself. I personally do, but some people do.
Yeah.
Maybe I won't travel this year for the holidays. I'll try something different. Get out of that pattern. But then, hey, great. If I try something new and I don't like it and I want to go back to how I was doing it, then I can,
I love that.
But yeah, it's so important. I think when people are losing somebody, when they're in the process of losing somebody, I always try to help them refocus on, but they're not gone yet. So get all of the information, that all those questions that you want to know about grandma, and really, did she hang out with the milkman or was it the postal company? Whatever it is, because when they're gone, you're making up the stories in your mind. And you're always right. You have the conversation, do you talk to your dad? And you're like, yeah, okay, I'm right, Dad. And then you get back and okay, but you are totally right. I get it. But if you go back and I don't know. That's just something that I think about, how to make things easier on people. That first year, it's a wash. You're experiencing Christmas, Thanksgiving, Kwanzaa, New Year's, Valentine's, whatever it is, your birthday, all for the first time. And so when people say to others, well, when are you going to get over it? It's been long enough. The other thing I offer is as advice to, say back to somebody is, thank you for your opinion. Because you can't say anything to that.
Yeah.
I thanked you. I've let you know that it's your opinion, and check trash. Right? Yeah.
Oh my goodness. This has been such a great conversation, but our time is almost up. Is there any last little nugget that you want to leave us with before we talk about where people can find you and where they can find the book?
Yes, I guess something that's been coming up for me a lot lately is, get busy living. Get busy living and enjoy it. Enjoy every minute, because it's going to be over before you know it. We're all headed that way. And, you only get this one kind of shot at life, right? You can only do something the first time, one time. And so make the most of every minute. And if somebody crosses your mind, call them, reach out. You'll be glad you did. That's what I would like to share. So
I love that. Now, I'm going to put up again, I still have it on the screen, lungtransplantfoundation.org is the foundation. My mind went blank for a minute. The foundation where the lady is raising money to help with lung transplants, correct?
Correct.
And then the other one, that giving.ucla.edu.
Yeah, that's if you want to donate directly to UCLA, which is how I would do it. But I like to have people, I like information. So I would say that if you are so inclined, please think about a small donation.
I forgot when we were talking, but when you're talking about certain things happening for certain reasons, I wanted to go back and say, because it was when you were talking, I thought, oh yeah, I never connected to my sister's death, but my sister and my dad both died from having exposure to some harsh chemicals while my dad was in the military. Agent Orange. But no, listen, it comes full circle, because my oldest daughter, who's in California, she lives in Pasadena, she is getting her PhD in environmental toxicology because of what happened to my dad and my sister. And she did not even know my sister. So it kind of, that wasn't what she originally was planning on going to school for. She got her Bachelor of Science in Psychology, but when she was in college was when my dad died from exposure to Agent Orange. And so she just changed her whole life. And plus she met her husband who's getting his PhD in chemistry. But still, the fact that they want to help the environment. They want to help people and to donate to science. And that's why I was like, when you were talking about UCLA.edu, I was like, that's science-based, people that love science and want to help spur the research. That's perfect.
Right. And as a teacher now, rather than trying to like help adults piece themselves back together, I use my love of education. Education's a gift that can never be taken away. And I use that to like, you notice it in classrooms. It's like, it's time for math and everybody, I have to go to the bathroom. Can I get water? Nobody wants to be there. And so I always start with, yay, math. And because when you hear something and people are like, oh, I'm so excited we're doing math, it starts to become ingrained in you. And I have had students be like, I really love math now. And I'm like, oh, that's so exciting. I'm glad to hear that. Because you're going to need to go save the world. So you're going to definitely need to get really good at math.
Tell me about it.
We'll need you to save the world in just a few years. So.
And your book is called I Can Still Hear You.
Yes.
And it has Independent Publisher Book Awards. Tell us a little bit about that before we hop off.
Oh, so I submitted my book to the Independent Publishers Book Awards, and I kind of didn't think I submitted it on the last day that you could send it in, and I thought, well, wing in a prayer. And so when I won the bronze medal, I was like, oh my God, I won a medal! Like I was super excited. And then I said, oh gosh, but it was just the bronze. And then I thought, you know what? At the Olympics, 1, 2, and 3 all get to stand on the podium. And so I was like, I'm proud of myself. Like this book took 6 years to write. It took a lot out of me. And I had a lot of help, obviously. I had great editors and I had a lot of wonderful feedback from people, but it was a labor of love. And so at any rate, to win a little award for it, just made me feel a little like, I got this.
Yeah. It's like it's another validation from your dad that you wrote the right story.
It is the validation that I wrote the right story, because I had another book that I wrote that did not win any awards, but should have, but was it's a nonfiction book and it's a self-help book. So you're right. I think that my dad was like, nope, that was the story you're supposed to be writing. So another thing, Melissa, right? Listen, like when they're telling you you're on the wrong path, like believe that they've seen further ahead than you have.
So true. And so hopefully we'll see Scarlett again soon in part two.
Part 2. She's going to head off to New York.
I love that. She was in Hawaii, California in this book. And then she's going to go to New York. So I love that.
Yeah. I've been playing around with it. Like, obviously she goes back to her house that she grew up in, and she's going to find another like box, but this one will be more like a musical box, something like, not that she has to go somewhere and get, but something that's in her house that gives her a message, tells her she needs to take a journey, and she'll go on her voyage and return.
Who knows? Maybe it was a box that maybe Mark had that her dad gave her.
Maybe. Yeah, that's a great idea. Thanks, Melissa. He was at Mark's house this whole time.
There you go. So Nicole,
that do happen. I truly believe that. So, and if you want to follow me, I'm on Instagram at writer Nicole B. Or you can email me at nicole@nicoleblack.com.
Yeah, I love that. And Nicole, once again, I want to thank you for coming on, for writing this story, the story that I needed to hear, so I can still hear you, because I needed to hear this at the perfect time when I was going through a really rough, like I said, I took 4 pages of notes just because that's just who I am. And I can't wait to see the second book. Hopefully it won't take you 6 years to write.
It won't.
So guys, I will put in the show notes where you can find Nicole, as well as where you can find her book. Is the other book published as well?
The other book is published. It's called Fat Shame.
Fat Shame?
Yeah.
Okay, so I will also link that as well if they were interested in checking that book out as well.
Yeah, it's a great book.
And Nicole, thank you for coming on and for sharing your dad with us too in this book.
Thanks, Melissa. And thank you for sharing your stories with me about your dad and your sister. I know it's not easy to share, and I appreciate you opening up to me.
Well, thank you. And so, guys, we will see you on the next chat from the Blog Cabin. Be blessed, and remember, keep chatting. Bye.